So in this video we're going to be looking at how to do the check stitch in the check raglan jumper. So this is in our retreat yarn, but it's knit in double stranded. So rather than doing one strand at a time, you're knitting two strands at the same time on a 12mm needle. So it creates a lovely super chunky cozy texture. So at the start of the jumper we've got a 1x1 rib at the bottom. So this is knit on a 10mm needle to create a slightly tighter feel. Then we change to a 12mm needle to create the check design. So then this was worked up straight, and then we shape up at the shoulders to create the raglan design. So in this video we're going to learn how to do the check stitch. So it's a 6-row pattern repeat, so it's quite nice and short to do. So you work 2 rows just in garter stitch, then you do 4 rows altogether doing slip stitch. So you'll do 2 rows in the white doing a slip stitch design, and then 2 rows in the navy, which creates our check pattern. So for the sleeves of this jumper we also work a farrow rib. So this is just in our main navy colour, which just adds a bit of texture to the piece. And then at the end we just pick up at the neckline to create our lovely turnover collar. So we're now going to learn how to make our check stitch. So I've started just a small sample of it here. So I've worked a few rows on the 1x1 rib, that's on the 10mm needles. Then I've changed to 12mm needles and done 2 rows just knitting in garter stitch. So that's the first 2 rows of the pattern done. So now we're going to go on to do the slip stitch design, which will create the check pattern. So we're going to bring our contrast white yarn into work. So firstly, we just want to slip the first stitch. So when we're slipping stitches, we always want to make sure that we slip the stitch purlwise. Reason we do this is if you slip it knitwise, it just changes the direction of the stitch. So if you slip it purlwise, you'll just find that the stitch will go the same way. So if you slip it knitwise, it'll actually twist the stitch. So whenever you're slipping the stitches, just always want to make sure slip it purlwise. So we're slipping the first stitch. Then we're bringing the white yarn into work, and we're going to knit the next 2 stitches with the white. So knit 1 stitch, then knit 2 stitches. So we've now slipped 1 stitch and then we've knitted 2 stitches. So then we're going to slip another stitch, so slip 1 purlwise, then knitting into the next 2 stitches. Then slipping 1 and then knitting the next 2 stitches. So just want to make sure when after we've slipped the stitch and we're going to knit into the next stitch, not to pull too tightly. We'll just have a little loop on the back of the work where your slip stitch is. So you just want to make sure not to pull too tightly so it doesn't ruche up the knitting. So I'm knitting the next 2 stitches, slipping 1 purlwise and knit 2. And just work to the end of the row. So then we should have 1 stitch at the end. You can either slip that stitch and turn the work, or you can just leave it on the needle, turn the work, as you're not going to be working that stitch anyways. So now we're on the wrong side of the work. So on the check stitch, the white part of it is actually in stocking stitch, so we're going to purl across this side. So our white's at the front of the work, and then we just want to purl our next 2 stitches, then slip 1, purl the next 2 stitches, then slip 1 and purl the next 2 stitches. Then we just want to work this to the end of the row. Then we should have 1 stitch on the end of our needle, so we just want to slip that on, and that's our row complete. So you can see on that you've got the 2 rows of the stocking stitch in the white, and then you've got the navy coming up. So now we're going to work 2 rows in the navy, working the same slip stitch way, but this is going to be in garter. So we're going to knit that first stitch, and then we're going to slip our next 2 stitches, which is in our white. So slip 2, then we're going to knit 1, So this yarn's now going to be going over 2 stitches, so we just want to make sure we're not pulling too tightly as we're going from our slips to our knit ones. So we're going to slip 2, then knit 1, slip 2, remember to slip purlwise, knit 1, and make sure not to do it too tightly. I'm going to slip 2, knit 1, and just repeat to the end of the row. And then we should have 1 stitch less, which we just want to knit the final stitch. So that is our first row of the navy done. So we're going to turn our work. So this row is slightly different how we're going to do it on the wrong side. So on the navy side we want to do it in garter rather than stocking stitch. So we're going to knit into these rather than purl. So we're going to knit into the first stitch. Then we want to take our yarn and actually bring it to the front of the work and then slip the next 2 stitches. We're just doing this as we've got the little loops from where the stitch is pulling over, so you just want to make sure these are on the back of the work. So we're going to take the yarn around and then bring it back to the back of the work, so the loop's going to be on the wrong side, and then we're going to knit the next stitch. Then bring the yarn to the front, slip the next 2 stitches, bring the yarn back to the back of the work, and knit the next stitch. Then we're just going to repeat that to the end, so yarn forward, slip 2, yarn back, knit 1, yarn to the front, slip 2, then yarn to the back and knit 1, and that's just keeping all our loops on the wrong side of our knit. And then just going to knit the last stitch. So that is how we do our check pattern. So you can just see here you've got the little garter ridges in between our white in the navy. So then we just want to knit the next 2 rows. So you just want to knit to the end of the row, and this is just creating our navy garter that's going in between our checks to create our tartan type pattern. Then we're going to turn our work and we're just going to knit all the way back. So you can see where all the loops are on the back, that's formed at the back. So there you can see our pattern repeat of our check stitch. So I'm just going to work one further repeat of that just so you can see how it works up. So we've done our first 2 rows, which is our garter rows in the navy. So now we're going to go into our 3rd row, which is in the white. So firstly we're going to slip the first stitch and then knit the next 2 stitches. Then slip the next stitch and knit the next 2 stitches, and we just want to repeat that to our last stitch. And then we should have 1 stitch left at the end, which you can either slip or you can just leave on that needle and turn the work. So now we're going to purl back, so we're going to purl 2, then slip 1, purl 2, and repeat to the end of the row to our last stitch. And then we just want to slip that final stitch. Then we're just going to work back using our navy just to create our garter. So we've knit into the first stitch and then we're slipping the next 2 stitches, then knitting 1 and slipping the next 2 stitches. and this is just creating a nice little garter ridge going up the check in our navy. Just going to carry on like this till the end, and then just knitting our last stitch. Then we're going to turn our work to the back. So then we're knitting the first stitch, and then we want to bring our yarn to the front, then slip in the next 2 stitches. So 1, 2, take our yarn to the back of the work, knit 1, yarn to front, slip 2, yarn to back, knit 1, and just repeat to the end of the row. And then we just want to knit the last stitch. And that is how we do our check pattern.